I'm Yasmina Okan. I am a Cancer Research UK Fellow, working together with the Centre for Decision Research at Leeds University Business School, and I'm also an Associate Professor in Behavioural Decision Making. My research focuses on examining how people make decisions about their health and how we can help them to make more informed, better decisions about their health. So one of the things that we've been looking at is how we can improve the design of communications about people's health risks. So for instance, people might need to decide between different treatment options. They might need to consider what are the chances that they might suffer different side effects if they go with one treatment or the other. And there's information that can be complicated. It involves understanding numerical concepts, probabilistic information that's not always straightforward. So we've been looking at ways to communicate that information more effectively using different strategies, but one of the main ones that I've been looking at is using simple graphs, simple visual aids that represent that kind of information in ways that are a little bit more accessible and user-friendly. My fellowship, funded by Cancer Research UK, aims to improve the design of communications about cervical cancer screening. We have been focusing mainly on web-based communications, but we have also been looking at leaflets and other sort of materials that can be accessed online. Now, cervical cancer screening is offered by the National Health Service to all women in the UK, aged between 25 and 64 years old. And basically, decisions about screening participation often rely on information that is available online or also on sort of leaflets, as I was mentioning earlier. So it is particularly important that this information is designed in a way that actually supports informed decisions about screening participation. What we want to do basically is to improve the design of this information so that it's easier to understand, and it can ultimately promote informed screening uptake. So we've been working on a number of different studies as part of this fellowship so far. The first one focused on examining what kind of information is currently included in websites in the UK that communicate information about cervical screening, and also in which sort of format that information is communicated. So what we found in our analysis so far is that websites tend to be quite comprehensive. They do include both information about benefits and risks of screening, also information about potential outcomes and so on, about the procedure in itself. However, we do find that the specific content does vary a little bit across websites, and we also find that information is not always communicated in the formats that we know from research are sort of more effective to convey this kind of information. So for example, we have seen in a number of studies that representing information about probabilities, risks, using simple graphs can help to overcome difficulties understanding numerical information. We have seen, however, that in these websites, graphs are not used very often. So here we are seeing an infographic that is included in the current version of the NHS leaflet that is sent to women who are eligible for cervical screening. And what this is showing is a summary of possible screening results. So basically, out of 100 women who have cervical screening, how many of them would be expected to have abnormal cells, and out of those, how many would be expected to then be invited for further tests, which is a colposcopy, as can be seen in the infographic, and also other kinds of outcomes. So this is a very nice way to break down the sort of potential results. We have seen in our interviews that women do tend to like this kind of figure a lot. They emphasize that it is a good way to visualize things, it catches their attention, it's colorful, and it helps to sort of see the potential different pathways in a very sort of intuitive way. However, we've also been identifying some aspects that could potentially be improved. For instance, a few of the women in our interviews mentioned that it was not very clear what might happen to women who are invited for a colposcopy, that is for further tests. So one of the things that could be considered in the future would be to add that information in the graph, so that's made more clear how many women will eventually need treatment after a colposcopy. And also one possibility would be to change the graph a little bit so that the sort of numbers are represented in a way that is proportional. So for example, here we see that the bubble representing the number of people, women who have a normal result, is of the same size as the bubble representing those who have abnormal cells, although in fact there are much less women who have abnormal cells, so that's something that could also be considered in the future. So the next step as part of this project will be to run an online survey. We're just about to launch that, in fact, and the main goal of the survey is to sort of identify how common are the misunderstandings that are associated with the NHS leaflet that provides information about cervical screening to women who are eligible. So basically this builds on the work that we have already done, where we used interviews to identify what misunderstandings existed, and now we will be reaching for a much larger sort of sample of women to see how common these misunderstandings actually are. We are also planning to do 2 additional surveys. One of them will focus on presenting information, well, not only on presenting information the way it is currently displayed in the leaflet or also in websites, the NHS websites, for instance, information about benefits and risks of screening, but also we will be presenting slightly different versions of the information. Just to give you an example, we'll be looking at presenting information about benefits and risks using just sort of verbal statements versus different numerical formats versus simple graphs that we will be designing based on our previous research on what is more effective, and we will be randomly assigning women to receive those different versions. So we'll then be comparing how well they understand the information. We will also be looking at their perceptions of the effectiveness of screening. We will also be looking at their emotional reactions, and we will also be assessing their intentions to actually participate in screening. And then in a survey that will be conducting after that one, the plan would be sort of to do a similar thing, but instead of just assessing all of these aspects immediately after they go through the information, we will be sort of tracking them over time. So after a few months, we'll be looking again at what they remember from the information they were presented with originally, and also we'll be looking at whether they actually went out and looked for more information about cervical screening, whether they talked with the doctor, for example, about screening, and also whether they actually participated in screening. So one of the things that we've been doing is to share these findings with Public Health England, because they are now developing a new version of the leaflet, so they were interested in knowing how our findings can inform new versions of the leaflet. And I'll be meeting with them in the future as well to share with them new findings of the project.